One of the most storied franchises in all of baseball is headed to Sacramento from Oakland in the 2025 MLB season. After a storied run that included 4 World Series titles, the Athletics will be playing games in West Sacramento until the 2027 season en route to Las Vegas. This organization operates a little differently than all the other teams in the league, and we're currently in the middle stages of a rebuild, as this team has some major league level young talent that is really solid and really helped the A's take a leap forward last season. So let's take a deep dive into the team formerly known as the Oakland Athletics, who currently play in Sacramento, and let's see what the future holds for them on their way to Las Vegas. I'll get right into some team ranks from 2024 and some farm system rankings for 2025. And before I get into specifics, I just want you to know that every number here is completely objective. I'm going to put my rankings formula in the description. All of the major league numbers come from Fangraphs, and all of the minor league numbers come from Baseball America. Comparatively to a lot of teams at the bottom of these rankings, the A's did some things really well in the majors last season. While their lineup ranked 23rd in all of baseball, they have one of the best designated hitters in baseball. They got a lot of young talent coming up and some prospects that will really help them this year. Their rotation was 26, but we'll see they did add some pretty solid names to that group, including their biggest free agent deal ever. Their bullpen was a strong spot, right at the halfway mark in baseball. They have one of the best young flame-throwing closers in baseball right now, a few young relievers that are going to help them along the way, and a lot of arm talent in this system. For defense, not great. They did make some moves to upgrade in that area, and a lot of their prospects getting full season run should help them in the defensive department. Their farm system is more deep than top-heavy, although they have some very good minor league pitchers coming up and 2 specific minor league hitters that are really going to help them in the future. Most of their guys that have came up through the minors are already at the major league level right now. With that being said, let's get into an overview of this organization, and we'll start with the brain trust here. Mark Kotsay is your manager, former Major League Baseball player, and I think a really solid manager at that. The A's improved heavily under his watch in 2024, and he seems to be a guy that the players really like. I think there's a lot going for him, and I think he's most likely your guy here moving forward. While Billy Beane is a guy that we all know from the Athletics, the guy they made the movie Moneyball about, he's taken a bit of a step back into a different management role in the recent years, and David Force has taken over as the general manager and the guy who's making most of your baseball decisions. This will be his 3rd season in 2025. He came in at the same time as Mark Kotsay, and he has yet to make the playoffs as general manager. The A's were 69-93 last season. Not a great record, but a much better season than most people going into the year thought they were going to have. They were 4th in the American League West last year, 13th in the American League, and their payroll was dead last in baseball. As I mentioned earlier, the A's operate differently than most teams, and they're one of the teams that does not spend money on their baseball product. This season, it went up a little bit. They gave out a couple free agent contracts, they went out and traded for some guys that are making money. In 2025, it's projected to be $68 million. PECOTA projects their record to be 71-91, them to finish 5th in the American League West and 14th in the American League. The projection system has them taking a bit of a step up in 2025, but I believe the A's have their sights set on a larger step forward. In terms of playoff odds, PECOTA is also really conservative with that for the A's. 1.8%, again, I think it should be a bit higher, as I really do think the A's made successful additions in this offseason, and they have a group of young players that are going to help their lineup and their pitching staff. Even though they finished with 69 wins last year, due to the A's not participating in revenue sharing in 2024, they ended up with the 11th pick in the 2025 draft. They'll also have 48 and 77, so in terms of top 100 draft capital, they'll have their fair share of picks to make. The biggest thing here, top contracts list, all 3 of these guys were not in the organization last year. Luis Severino had a 3-year, $60 million deal given to him. Jeffrey Springs, traded for from the Rays, is making $10.5 million this year. And Jose Leclerc came in on a 1-year, $10 million deal. So while the A's still aren't spending a ton of money, they're definitely taking steps forward in that area. The A's last made the playoffs in the COVID-shortened 2020 season when they had a really solid group, but there's really nothing left of that team in 2025. For their organization success, they actually had one of the best AA teams in all of baseball with an 84-54 record last season. The Las Vegas Aviators at AAA were around 500, and the high A and single A teams really struggled last year. I would expect their AAA team to take a step forward this year alongside their high A team, as there's some good talent coming into those teams. As the A's have yet to play in Sacramento, there's no data on park factor yet, so we're not 100% certain what it's going to be going into this year. In recent memory, this is one of the most active years the Athletics have ever had in the offseason. I mentioned the 3 big pitcher contracts. Luis Severino was brought in after a solid season with the Mets. 3 years, $60 million. He's projected just under 2 WAR in 2025. Jeffrey Springs is a really interesting one. He was pacing to have a Cy Young season in 2023 before he went down with an injury, and he came back for a very small sample in 2024, where he was solid, but there were some long-term signs that weren't great. The main piece of that trade going over was Joe Boyle to Tampa Bay, and they should swap rotation spots, with Springs going in right behind Severino as the 2-starter in 2025. They also brought in Jose Leclerc on a 1-year, $10 million deal from Texas. He'll slot into that bullpen to be a setup guy for Mason Miller. Gio Urshela was brought in from Atlanta to compete for the third base job, and Jacob Lopez also came in that trade with Tampa Bay. They lost Ross Stripling to free agency. He gave them just over 1 WAR in 2024. I mentioned Joe Boyle before. As a young pitcher, he has some really good numbers on his pitches, and he'll be in the rotation for Tampa this year. Kyle Muller left to go overseas after giving him 0.1 WAR in 2024, and Scott Alexander is still a free agent, again giving 0.1 WAR in 2024. I'll explain quickly for anyone who isn't familiar with WAR. It's a statistic that measures the wins that this single player would bring above a replacement level player at that position. So somebody that you could bring up from AAA at any time or pick up off of waivers from another team would be considered a replacement level player. This is how much better they are than that replacement level. In the season storylines for the A's, I have continual improvement as the biggest one. I feel they really took a step forward, especially in the second half last season. A lot of their young guys gave them a lot offensively. Their pitchers took a step forward. And given the additions they made in the offseason, I think we should see improvement in the rotation in 2025. I was spending money as a second season storyline, and the A's are finally a team in revenue sharing in Major League Baseball, so they have to spend a set amount of money every single year to get that revenue sharing money. So they went out and they gave it to some free agents this year. Luis Severino pictured got the biggest deal in A's history, $60 million. Jeffrey Springs coming in making $10.5 million. Luis Severino making money. They actually extended Brent Rooker in the offseason. They're giving out money really for the first time in their franchise's history. This is really something different for the A's and something that fans of this team are not used to seeing them doing. Finally, I have youth movement here, and Jacob Wilson is the guy I have pictured for that. He's a prospect that came up last year, absolutely lit up the minor leagues, and then got hurt and wasn't able to give a full sample at the majors. Guys like Lawrence Butler, Tyler Soderstrom, and JJ Bleday gave really good seasons for the A's last year. And if they can continue to improve and this youth movement takes over, that could be a huge step forward for the franchise. I'll explain a couple of the numbers here getting into the projected lineup and bench. WOBA stands for weighted on base average. Think about it as on base percentage, but every single thing is weighted. So a home run is weighed more than a triple, which is weighed more than a double, etc. League average is 310. A rule of thumb for it, if it would be a good on base percentage, it would be a good WOBA. I also have weighted runs created plus here, and think of it as a comprehensive offensive metric just to show how good you are as an offensive player. For every plus stat, league average is going to be 100, and everything above or below that is the percent better or worse than you are compared to league average. Getting into specifics here, this is one of the more fun lineups in all of baseball. You got 3 guys here at the top of the order who are top 10 projected WAR at their position in 2025. Lawrence Butler had a great season last year, specifically the second half. He's projected 26 home runs and over 3 wins above replacement in 2025. Brent Rooker is probably the most underrated baseball player right now, projected to be 42% better than league average offensively. We'll get into some of his statistics when we go into his deep dive, but projected almost 4 WAR as a designated hitter is outrageous. JJ Bleday took a huge step forward in 2024. Shea Langeliers, great pop from the catcher position. Tyler Soderstrom, one of the prospects coming up through the ranks. Zach Geloff as well. Seth Brown and Urshela are your 2 vets on this team. And Jacob Wilson, as I mentioned, a huge prospect that has great minor league numbers. Projected to be 20% better than league average next year. This is one of the few lineups in all of baseball where every single player is projected to be better than league average as a hitter. one of the most exciting young outfields in all of baseball, and 6 guys that have less than 3 years of service time. Along with that, 6 dudes that have 22 projected homers or more. The more I look at this lineup, the more I love it. There is so much to be excited about this year for the A's. On the bench, you got Johnny Pereda. He was brought over in a trade. Max Schumann, Miguel Andujar, and Esteury Ruiz, your speed guy on the bench. All 3 of these guys I would expect to contribute to the team this year. I will mention that all of these lineups, all of these rotations, all of these bullpens are projected by Fangraphs Roster Resource, and that's where I took all of this information from. And let's get into the projected rotation. You got your 2 vets at the top that we brought in this season, and 3 really young guys. Estes and Spence especially. JP Sears, although he is under 3 years of service time, has been up the last 2 years with the A's, and he's been very solid. A rotation that wasn't great in 2024, but with the addition of these 2 guys at the top, I think could take a major step forward. Luis Severino had great numbers. He started a couple playoff games for the Mets, and he was good all season, really, for them last year. 1.6 projected WAR in 2025. Jeffrey Springs, as I mentioned earlier, got off to a Cy Young pace in 2023, came back last year after Tommy John. He's projected under a 4 ERA and projected to be really the best guy here. JP Sears is an innings eater. He will give you a ton of innings over a season. Hasn't had great ERA numbers, but he's going to go out there and he's going to pitch every 5 days. Joey Estes, a lot to like with him. He'll still have rookie status in 2025 and could be a dark horse rookie of the year guy in the AL. And then Mitch Spence, he was a Rule 5 pick of the Yankees last year. He did stay on the roster all year, so the A's get to keep him moving forward. He's projected a 4.34 ERA, just under 1 WAR next year. I'll also mention Osvaldo Bido as another name that could be here in this rotation. I'll go into him a little bit more later, but these are your 5 guys projected by Fangraphs. Here we're going to roll into the projected bullpen, and you might have the best guy in all of baseball closing out games for the A's. Projected a 2.69 ERA and a 37% strikeout rate. He's just a dog. He's going to be back there in the 9th inning every single game, and he's going to give you an absolute flamethrower of an arm. Jose Leclerc, brought in from Texas last season, will be a high leverage option. Tyler Ferguson will also be a high leverage option. Michael Antonez, one of the more fun guys to look at the Baseball Savant page for. He's projected under a 4 ERA and a 28% strikeout rate. TJ McFarland's going to be your big lefty reliever here. Grant Holman and Noah Murdoch will be in this bullpen, and Hogan Harris is going to be your long guy, a guy that could come in and start some games for the A's down the stretch. This is a high variance bullpen. A lot of guys with a lot of high strikeout rates and a lot of high walk rates. A lot could go well, a lot could go wrong here. I personally do really like this group. Let's get into these deep dives on the players, and I'll go over a couple of the numbers that we have on the screen here. The OFF, BSR, and DEF are going to be your offense, base running, and defensive run values as listed by Baseball Savant. I'll give you their splits against righties and lefties, their wins above replacement since 2022, or if they weren't up before 22, just since they've been in the majors per 162, their weighted runs created plus, home runs, stolen bases, and their slash lines. On the Baseball Savant pages, you'll have a lot of numbers. All of the numbers with the X are going to be your expected numbers, so expected weighted on base average, batting average, and slugging, your average exit velocity, your barrel rate, hard hit rate. Launch angle sweet spot is the percent of time that you hit the ball between the launch angle sweet spot of 8 and 24 degrees in the air. And then you have your chase rate, whiff rate, strikeout rate, walk rate. All of your defense and running stuff will be on there as well. So your starting catcher here is going to be Shea Langeliers. He was the big piece in the Matt Olson trade from the Braves just a couple of years ago, and he's been a really solid catcher. Specifically last season, he took a big step forward offensively. 109 weighted runs created plus. He slugged .450 and had 29 home runs last year. He's an average exit velocity king. He's a barrel rate guy. He has a really fast bat. He does have some swing and miss in his game, but he hits home runs. And for a catcher, that's really important. Last year, he hit lefties and righties both pretty similar, and he's pretty good defensively in terms of caught stealing above average and pop time, but he's not a great framer, and he's not a great blocker at catcher. Surprisingly, he's in the upper half in baseball in sprint speed as well. While he wasn't a great base runner, 12th percentile in base running runs, he does have some potential there as he has some sort of speed. Specifically for a catcher, that's pretty nice. Last season, he got off to a pretty rough start in April at 626 OPS, but had a great May. 588 slug, 921 OPS, 6 home runs. He finished the pre-All-Star break with a 701 OPS, and post-All-Star break, he had a 793 OPS. A good second half of July and all of September really contributed to that. One stat that really stood out for me, in the 9th inning, 1.432 OPS in 42 at-bats, 44 plate appearances last season. He's a guy who actually hits fastball, breaking, and off-speed pitches all pretty similarly. Actually, last year he hit off-speed better than fastballs. That's really what gave him the biggest step forward, because the year before, he was really bad at hitting breaking and off-speed pitches. I'm excited to see what a full 2025 looks like for Shea Langeliers, and I might expect a 30 home run season out of him. And at the catcher position, that could be very, very valuable. Alongside Langeliers is Johnny Pereda. He was brought in from Miami this offseason to be the backup catcher, and he doesn't have much of a sample at the major league level. Last year, just 40 at-bats. He didn't qualify for any of the offense, base running, defense numbers. 67% below league average as a hitter, but again, a very small sample. He's 28 years old. He had an 829 OPS in AAA last year with Miami, 4 home runs, and a 28-40 walk-to-strikeout ratio. So I think Oakland really liked what they saw from his AAA stats and then wanted to bring in this guy to see if he could be that at the major league level. At first base in 2025 for the A's, we have Tyler Soderstrom, a guy who came up as a very highly touted catcher prospect in the A's organization and made the switch to first base. He had a pretty solid 2024 season, 114 weighted runs created plus in 61 games after he came up and didn't do very well in 2023. A 472 OPS and 138 plate appearances, 43 strikeouts, and 3 home runs in that 2023 year, followed up by a 61 game sample in 24, where he only struck out 53 times compared to 20 walks, had 9 home runs, and has a very impressive baseball savant page. He didn't play enough games to qualify for any of the run value stats or any of the rankings. His xWOBA, expected slugging, exit velocity, barrel rate, hard hit rate, bat speed, and walk rate are all in the above average category. And while he does have some swing and miss in his game, for a guy just learning how to hit in the majors, I think he had a really good year last year. You can see he wasn't very valuable, per 162 a negative 1.1 WAR, but that was really weighed down by negative 1 WAR in 45 games in 2023. He's still learning how to play the first base position, he's not going to give you a ton defensively, and he's just a tick below average in running. He could still give you some games at catcher if you need it, but I expect the A's to bring him in as their full-time first baseman this year, and I'm really optimistic for what he can do offensively. Soderstrom had 2 great months last year, a June and a September with an 826 and 852 OPS. He had an 852 OPS only playing in September post-All-Star and a 711 pre-All-Star. He actually underperformed his metrics a little bit last year as well, a 348 expected WOBA and a 322 WOBA, so we should see that number start to go up a little bit next year. The biggest thing with him is he absolutely murdered fastballs last year. An expected slugging of 649 and expected WOBA of 445. He didn't hit breaking pitches or off-speed pitches relatively well at all, but if he can be that good of a fastball hitter as a lefty first baseman in this lineup, you get really excited for the future of Tyler Soderstrom. At second base, we have Zach Geloff, another one of these prospects coming up for the A's that is leading this youth movement. 3.2 WAR per 162 since 22, but he did take a pretty big step back last year. I think the biggest thing with Geloff, what kind of a hitter is he going to be in 2025? He's going to bring you a lot of value just because of how good of a fielder and base runner he is. But if he can take another step towards that 2023 season and get his numbers more in line with that, he can be incredibly valuable. You see, even though his offensive numbers weren't great, still 17 home runs and 25 steals for him last year in 138 games. In 300 plate appearances with the A's in 23, he had an 842 OPS and 14 home runs in just 69 games. In 2024, he hit the ball on the ground a lot more, he was striking out a lot more, he actually led the American League in strikeouts with 188, and he just wasn't hitting the ball as hard. That's something I would like to see him take a step back to this season, because if he does that, he can be one of the more valuable players at second base in all of baseball. Also with Geloff, he's an interesting reverse splits guy. In the majors, he's never really been a factor at the plate against lefties, which is usually not what you see from young righty hitters. Unfortunately for Geloff, he actually took a step back in the second half as well, a 612 OPS compared to a 648 in the first half. He had a decent June and 810 OPS, but that's really the only month where he was solid. Every other month, he was a 675 OPS or below. I still have hope for Zach Geloff, and he's still going to be really valuable just because of what he brings defensively and as a runner. But for him to be the player that I thought he could be after 2023, he's going to need to get back to a good offensive player. Currently listed on Fangraphs roster resource as their third baseman is Gio Urshela, a guy who underratedly brings a lot of value to a team. 1.8 WAR per 162 since 2022. And even though he had 81 weighted runs created plus last season, he's in the top 15th percentile of range at third base, and that brings a lot of value. Even though he was 19% below league average last year as a hitter, he still brought .7 WAR in 128 games just because of that. Urshela is a really interesting hitter. He doesn't strike out a lot, but he doesn't walk a lot. He hits the ball where he should in the air, but he doesn't hit it very hard. He's got a high expected batting average, and he squares up a lot of balls, but he chases a lot. He's a guy who's going to derive a lot of his value offensively from his slug just because he doesn't walk and he doesn't get on base as much as a lot of other guys. He's a much better hitter against righties than lefties, at least he was last season, but every year since 2020 before that, he actually hit lefties better. So I think that's something we could see regress to the mean over time, and if he gets run at third base for the A's, I think he could be a positive player. Urshela, unlike a lot of these guys here, just because of his age and his profile, isn't necessarily a high ceiling player, but he's definitely a high floor guy, a really good defender, a glue guy, and a veteran presence that this team really doesn't have offensively outside of maybe Brent Rooker. I would expect Gio Urshela to be your third baseman for at least the start of the year next season. At shortstop is Jacob Wilson, and in 2025, he's probably the biggest X factor on this team. You know what you're going to get at this point out of guys like Gio Urshela and Brent Rooker, and for the most part, Lawrence Butler, but Jacob Wilson has yet to put up the numbers that he put up at the minor league level. He got very short run in 2024 at the majors, 28 games, and he was still just 14% below league average, although he got very unlucky at the plate. He's a contact first bat. He's a guy who doesn't strike out a lot. He doesn't walk as much as you would like to see, but he has a really good arm at shortstop, so he can be a plus for you defensively and offensively. He was the 6th pick in the draft in 2023, and he's currently the A's #1 prospect. I'll read off some of these minor league numbers for you, and yes, these are right off the website. These are real. In 3 levels last year, 53 games, rookie ball, AA, and AAA, a 1.141 OPS. He had a 200 weighted runs created plus in the minors last year, which means his offensive production was that of 2 league average players. He's never really been a guy who walks a lot, but he doesn't strike out a lot either. 6.2% walk rate, but a 6.6% strikeout rate. With the A's last year, Wilson showed the makings of what could be a very valuable player. He would have been 100th percentile in K rate, whiff rate, and squared up rate if his numbers had lasted over a full season, but there are some things that are a bit of concern. He doesn't hit the ball very hard. You see a lot of the blue there in the hard hit numbers. And he doesn't hit the ball at an advantageous launch angle all the time. He's always been a guy with a plus hit tool, but not a lot of power to speak of. So I'm really interested to see the player that Jacob Wilson ends up being with the A's. I think he can derive a lot of defensive value. I think he can be a good base runner, and obviously his contact skills are almost unmatched. He's the #1 prospect for a reason. He has the prospect pedigree he has for a reason. And if he can get anywhere close to those minor league numbers in the majors, he should be a great player for a long time to come. Still only 22 years old. Seth Brown's going to be our left fielder here, and he's one of the very few mainstays from those old Oakland A's teams. 0.4 WAR per 162, 91 weighted runs created plus last year. He's had a bit of a steady decline offensively the past couple years, 25 home runs and a 749 OPS in 2022. And his biggest thing is he's not barreling the ball as much anymore. 90th percentile in barrel rate in 22, 55th percentile in 24. Still hits the ball harder than league average, 67th percent there, and he still has a fast bat. But he strikes out a lot, doesn't walk a lot, and he whiffs and chases a decent amount for a hitter. He's been a breaking ball hitter in the past, a 323 expected WOBA in 23, but just a 220 in 24. That's where he took his biggest step back. He underperformed some of the numbers on his fastball, though, so if that gets back to normal, I would expect that to become a positive for him. Historically, he's been an above-average hitter against righties and a below-average hitter by a pretty fair amount against lefties. Last year was pretty similar, only 27 plate appearances against lefties, but just a 667 OPS against righties last season, compared to a 738 and a 798 in the last 2 years. His biggest positive, and something that gives me optimism going forward, is how good he was post All-Star last year, compared to the rest of his season. A 717 OPS, so still not great, but compared to a 610 OPS in the first half, that's a much needed step forward for Seth Brown. A 969 OPS and 4 home runs in 50 plate appearances in the month of July really helped with that. And a 72 plate appearance month of August with over an 830 OPS. He finished the season off kind of rough, a 575 in September, 21 strikeouts to 1 walk that month, so that was a very tough month for him. I think Brown took a step back from the hitter that he once was, and I don't see him as a long-term left fielder here, but he still serves a purpose. If he can get back to hitting righties to the level that he used to, he could be a positive, and he could be that starting left fielder against righties every game. Going to center field, we have a player that was a huge positive for the A's last season. After struggling for a majority of his time with the A's, he had 3.1 WAR and 20 home runs, a 330 WOBA, 120 weighted runs created plus in 159 games for the A's last year. JJ Bleday was a former 4th overall pick in 2019 out of Vanderbilt by the Miami Marlins. He was traded for AJ Puck just a couple years ago, and this has ended up being a long-term win for the A's. After hitting to just a batting average of 167 and 195 and OPSs of 586 and 665 in 22 and 23, he ended up with a great season last year. A 761 OPS and positive defense as a center fielder is so valuable in baseball. While he's not the best in terms of range, he has a very strong arm, and he gave you a ton of arm value last year. 93rd percentile and 3 arm value runs in 24. His biggest tool as a hitter is that he walks a lot. He gets on base and he hits the ball where it should be hit. 37% of the time he's hitting that launch angle sweet spot. He doesn't chase a ton and he doesn't strike out a ton. Coming into this season, in 137 games in the majors, he was actually a replacement level player with just 0.1 wins above replacement over those 2 seasons, one with Miami and one in Oakland. He raised his launch angle sweet spot percentage by over 7% in 24, which led to much better expected stats for him. Alongside that, he took a huge step up against lefties last season. A 482 OPS in 72 plate appearances against them in 2023, and in 125 and 24, a 714 OPS, so he was above league average against lefties as a lefty hitter last year. He's part of this really exciting outfield for the A's, and a guy that gave you a full season in the majors last year, so you can kind of expect these stats to follow. He got even better as the season went on, an 807 OPS in the second half and 9 home runs compared to 11 in the first half and many less at-bats. A guy who in center field can give you positive value with an arm. He's not going to have a ton of range, not super fast, but if you can get this offensive output from him next year and in the upcoming seasons, you feel really good about him as a solid contributor to this team. Getting into right field, we got maybe my favorite player in all of baseball in Lawrence Butler. A guy who's one of the most fun at-bats to watch in all of baseball, and he took a huge step forward in 2024. An 807 OPS, 22 home runs, and 18 stolen bases in just 125 games compared to a 581 OPS in 2023. He's a guy who does a lot of things really well and nothing really badly. Not a single number on his baseball Savant page is below 36th percentile as his K rate is, but he's about a league average defender, just a bit better in right field, and a bit better than league average as a base runner as well. He got most of his run last year as a leadoff hitter, and in that spot, he did not disappoint. 889 OPS in 277 plate appearances as the one hitter, and overall just a great season for Lawrence Butler last year. An incredibly valuable player and somebody that you see as one of the staples of your franchise. He was 91st percentile in base running run value, 78th in batting run value. He hits the ball hard. He hits it on the barrel. He does have some chase, some whiffs, some strikeout in his game, but if you're giving these positive numbers as a hitter, you can live with that. My biggest area for optimism for him is I still don't think he's reached the top of his potential. 62nd percent in launch angle sweet spot percentage. If you see that number get up to the top, those expected slugging, expected WOBA numbers are going to go through the roof. He was the beneficiary of one of the best months in baseball by any player all year. A 98 plate appearance July with a 1.210 OPS and an 802 slug. 10 home runs in just that month. He finished post-All-Star with an .898 OPS on the season and 13 home runs. A guy who has under 600 plate appearances at the major league level, and a guy who's already so advanced as a hitter. He's 24 years old, 3 WAR per 162, 30% better than league average last year. This is an absolute stud and maybe my favorite player in the entire league. And with all that being said about all the great hitters in this lineup, we haven't even gotten to the best one, and actually one of the best hitters in the entire league. Brent Rooker was 64% better than league average as a hitter last year. 39 home runs, 11 bags in 145 games, 3.7 wins above replacement per 162 as a DH. For those who don't understand why that's so impressive, he doesn't play in the field at all, so he can't accrue WAR from playing defense at all. This is straight from offense and base running. He was in the top 2nd percentile in batting run value last year, top 10th percentile in expected WOBA, expected slugging, barrel rate, and hard hit rate. He walks just a tick under 10%. He has a fast bat. He hits the ball in the air. A great expected batting average as well. He did overperform a couple of his numbers here, but it's not something that you would say, oh, I think he's going to take a big step back next year. A player that's had an absolutely meteoric rise as a hitter. He was a below replacement level player, a negative .6 WAR in 3 seasons before joining the A's. Since then, 69 home runs and 7.2 WAR in the last 2 seasons. He's been an absolute godsend for this organization, and he's the best hitter on this team. He hit both lefties and righties pretty well last year, 949 and 921 OPS against both sides, and didn't really have a bad month all season. His June OPS was 725, every other one was above 857 all year. He just got extended this offseason, a 5-year, $60 million extension to cover his arbitration years and 1 extra season. And the A's really lucked their way into getting one of the best hitters in all of baseball on their team. Acquired him off waivers from Kansas City in November of 2022. They didn't have to pay anything to get this guy on their roster, and he's been the best player the last 2 seasons for the A's. And we got a decent bench here for Oakland as well. Max Schumann, Miguel Andujar, and Esteury Ruiz. Schumann was a 27-year-old rookie for them last year, 20th round pick out of Eastern Michigan in 2018. Wasn't a great player offensively, but gave you about league average defense and an above average base runner last year. He plays shortstop and can play really anywhere. Miguel Andujar is a former Yankees top prospect that ended up having an above average offensive season for the A's last year. He's more of a third base outfield type, and he's a guy who's not going to strike out a lot and can hit lefties off the bench. And then finally, Esteury Ruiz, lightning quick outfielder who's acquired from Milwaukee as part of the Sean Murphy-William Contreras trade. Didn't get much run at the majors in 2024, but in 2023, 97th percentile sprint speed and 95th percentile base running run value. He had 67 stolen bases in 2023. Getting into the pitching side, we got a new ace of the staff here in Luis Severino. I mentioned before, brought over on the biggest contract in A's history, and he had a great season last year for the Mets. 3.91 ERA, 161 strikeouts, and 182 innings pitched. He had last year and has always had a great fastball, 90th percentile in fastball run value. He does good at limiting contact. He's not a big strikeout guy. Right at 60% with his fastball usage, at 35% on his four-seam and 25% on his sinker. Something you don't see very often in baseball, the four-seamer is actually a better pitch than the sinker. A 296 expected WOBA last year, 357 on the sinker. His sweeper was very good last year, at 217 expected WOBA. He took a really big step forward in 2024 after a really down 2023, a 6.65 ERA and 89.1 innings pitched. But he's shown to be a solid starter here. I don't know if he's necessarily a one starter, but in this rotation, he definitely will be. Since 2022, he switched out a lot of strikeout for more stuff that gets the ball hit less hard. And he's really just a solid pitcher, a guy that's going to give you innings and can help you get through the season. He has had a bit of an injury history in the past, so that might be something to monitor. But last year, he got through it successfully. He looked great, and I believe this is a great pickup for the Athletics. After Sevy as the two-starter, we go into a guy that the A's understandably put a pretty big leap of faith on in 2020. This offseason, after acquiring him from the Tampa Bay Rays for Joe Boyle and prospects. 33 innings pitched last year, a 3.27 ERA. In 2023, 16 innings at 0.56 ERA and 24 strikeouts. In 2023, very small sample, but I'll go over some numbers. Top 10th percentile in hard hit rate, barrel rate, K rate, whiff rate, expected batting average, and expected ERA. In 2022, his last close to full season, 135 innings pitched, a 2.46 ERA. And on the baseball savant, 92nd percentile in pitching run value, 98th in off-speed run value, 96% in chase rate. A lot of red on this page. There's a lot to like from this pitcher. He did just undergo Tommy John surgery after his torrid start in 2023. He came back in 2024 to give you 7 starts, and he was pretty good. 3.27 ERA, as I mentioned before, 37 Ks. I don't think the A's make that trade if they don't see the sample in 2024 and know that his stuff is still there. I mentioned a little bit earlier that there are a little bit of concerns with what he gave last year. His fastball velo is down about a mile an hour. He's not a hard thrower, so I don't know if that's something that'll really hurt him over the long run, but he did give up hard hit balls and barrels a lot more than he had in the past, albeit it was a very small sample size. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of good with him. I think he's a really solid 2-starter, and for the teams in the lower tier of these rankings, he's absolutely one of the better pitchers here. An incredible off-speed pitcher that can get you to chase with the best of them in the league. I'm really excited to see what Jeffrey Springs can give in a full 2025 season. We'll go to JP Sears here as the third pitcher in this rotation, a lefty, an acquisition from the Yankees a few years ago. And since 2023, 172.1 innings and 180.2 innings in the last 2 years. The results haven't been great, but he's been a positive value player. 1.2 WAR last year, 0.6 WAR the year before. He's given you 32 starts the last 2 seasons each. He's not a super hard thrower. He's a guy that's not going to walk a lot of people. He won't get a lot of strikeouts. A lot of the Savant numbers from last season don't really love him, but they do like his breaking pitches. Per Savant, he's been the same player the last 3 years, really. The only differences are the pitches that have worked for him and what hasn't. Last season, his fastball was down a bit in run value and his off-speed was down a bit in run value. The year before, his breaking pitches were not as good, but his off-speed and fastball were much better. But he's a solid innings-eating starter that the A's are going to throw out there every 5 days. He could give you a good start. He had 13 quality starts last season in his 32 starts to a 4.38 ERA. You're not going to get a ton of upside from him, but what you're going to get is a guy who's going to give you innings, and he's going to be there for the A's all season as a lefty in this rotation. So going into the 4th spot, 23-year-old Joey Estes is listed here by Fangraphs. Last season, a 5.01 ERA, 127.2 innings and 92 strikeouts. One thing about Estes, he doesn't walk anybody. He has 2 pitches that were really good last year. The sweeper had a 198 expected WOBA, and the slider had a 299. Everything else kind of got crushed, and that really led to the numbers that you're seeing on the screen here. He's a guy who has some minor league pedigree. In 2023, 3.74 ERA in 137 innings, 131 strikeouts. Last season when he was there was not good. The PCL is a league with a high run environment, so this is going to be slanted a little bit, but he had a 6.04 ERA in 6 starts, 28 innings last year in AAA. That being said, I do think there's a bit to work with here for Estes. His sweeper and slider, I think, should be thrown more. They were really effective pitches that didn't get hit a lot last year. The 4-seamer needs some tweaks. It doesn't have a great shape. It's not coming in very fast at 92.4 miles an hour. It's a couple ticks below league average. But the A's are definitely going to give him some run out here. 23 years old, as I mentioned earlier. He's got some major league innings under his belt. Most of his time still at the minors, about 137 innings in the majors. He needs to limit the hard contact. He's 1st percentile in ground ball rate, so most of his batted ball events are going to be hit in the air. It was a bit of a struggle for Joey Estes last season, but I'm not ruling him out in the long term as a guy who can be good. He knows how to control the zone. He just didn't really get the results that he expected last year. The xERA is still a tick below his actual ERA and FIP numbers, a 4.43 compared to the 5.01 last year. If he can give you closer to that 4.43 this year, you start to see growth in his game and a guy who could be here for a while. The current listed 5-starter on Fangraphs is Mitch Spence. He's an interesting one, a Rule 5 pick from the Yankees 2 years ago. He stayed on the roster all year last year, and he had some decent numbers. 151 innings pitched, 126 strikeouts. His expected ERA of 4.14 was much below his actual ERA of 4.58, 81st percentile in ground ball rate, 82nd percentile in chase rate, 67th percentile in walk rate, but a lot of the other numbers didn't necessarily like him. Both his cutter and his slider, the 2 pitches that he throws the most, got hit a little more than it was expected last season, a 30-point increase in the WOBA from expected WOBA on the cutter, and another 30-point increase on the slider. I think the biggest thing with him, he could make batters chase, but he didn't get a lot of strikeouts. I think putting him over a full season, letting him learn how to get batters to miss those pitches, I think he'll get a higher strikeout rate this season. But again, a 1.2 wins above replacement last year, so he was still pretty good as the 5 starter for them. I'll also talk about Osvaldo Bido as a potential 5th starter option next season. 16 games, 9 starts, a 3.41 ERA, 63.1 innings. I don't have his numbers up here, but he was 94th percentile in expected ERA, 98th in expected batting average. He has the lowest hard hit rate against in all of baseball, 93rd percentile in barrel rate, and 99th in average exit velocity. So he's a guy to definitely be on the lookout for as a breakout pitcher this season. His off-speed pitches were very good. He was actually acquired as a minor league free agent from the Pirates a couple years ago. Struggled in 2023 in the majors, but in 2024 took a giant step forward. A right-handed pitcher, 29 years old. Remember the name Osvaldo Bido as a guy who could be solid for this team, and a potential 5 starter, if not right away, pretty soon after the season starts. Now that the rotation is finished, let's get into the high leverage relievers, and this is just a really solid group. All 3 of these guys on the screen here above a 30% K rate. Mason Miller at 41.8. So he struck out over 40% of the batters that he faced last year. A 2.49 ERA and a 2.18 FIP to go along with that. Miller is 63% four-seam, 35% slider, and then 2% change to keep the hitters off balance. He throws that fastball at just about 101 miles an hour, the slider at 87.5. His baseball Savant page looks like a home game at the Kohl Center, almost 100th percentile in every single stat above his K rate. K rate, whiff rate, fastball velo, expected batting average, expected ERA, all 100th percentile, 99th in chase, 96 in average exit velocity. The 2 things he's not great at, he walks 8.4% of the hitters he sees, and he gives up a decent amount of line drives and fly balls, only a 40.7% ground ball rate. Outside of that, you can't say a single negative on Mason Miller. Just an incredible pitcher, probably the most valuable asset in this entire organization. I mean, the WOBA on the slider last year, 170, didn't give up a single hit on the changeup. The four-seam fastball WOBA, 254, and that was still over the expected of 249. Just an incredible closer and a great player to have at the back of this bullpen. We'll go into Jose Leclerc here. As I mentioned, $10 million deal to bring him in from the Texas Rangers. Last season, a bit of a step back, but as you can see, his FIP is much lower than his ERA. The last 2 seasons before 2024, a 268 and a 283 ERA. Pitched in the World Series for the Rangers in 2023, 92nd percentile K rate, 96 whiff rate, 96 hard hit rate. He does a lot of things really well. He's always been a high walk rate guy. The thing with him last year, he didn't generate as many chases or whiffs, and he gave up a little more barrels than he usually does. I still think he's a very good pitcher, and I think we'll see that ERA decline sharply this year if he gives the same sample that he gave last year. So Tyler Ferguson, an interesting story, only 1 season in the majors at 31 years old, and he was pretty good last year. 3.68 ERA in 51 innings, 91st percentile K rate, 84th in expected batting average. He has great off-speed pitches and a great fastball. His breaking pitches get hit pretty hard. Another common theme here, he walks a lot of guys, but he strikes out a lot of guys. They'll hit the ball in the air against him, so he could be susceptible to some home runs. But overall, a really good pitcher. The expected numbers were actually much better than his actual numbers last season. So maybe over a larger sample this year, he'd be a little better in those areas. But with that being said, a really, really good back of the bullpen here. Really high variance, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks. You're not going to get a ton of balls in play against these guys, but when you do, they're most likely going to be in the air. Going into the rest of the bullpen here, you start off with a really underrated reliever in Michael Otonez. Again, a pretty high variance guy, 36.4 on the K rate, but 13.2% on the walk rate. On Baseball Savant, top 5th percentile in expected ERA, batting average, fastball velo, average exit velocity, whiff rate, K rate, barrel rate, and hard hit rate. Great breaking pitches last season. His fastball did get hit pretty hard, but definitely a guy to watch out for in 2025. His ERA was much higher than his FIP. I would expect those to get closer next year, and a really good reliever to start off this pen. TJ McFarland here as really your lefty relief option. 3.81 ERA, pretty similar to the FIP. Doesn't strike out or walk as many. He's really your lowest variance guy. He's going to get the ball hit a decent amount. But the good thing for him, 97th percentile ground ball rate, 93rd in barrel rate. 60% of the time the ball gets hit into the ground with him. His expected ERA last year was actually 3.36. So if he gives you what he gave us last year, expect those numbers to come down. Only 39 Ks in 56 innings. And actually the slowest fastball in all of baseball. But that's the thing with him. He doesn't throw very hard. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, but he puts the ball on the ground. A 4th round pick by the Cleveland Indians in 2007. Grant Holman here, currently the 19th prospect by MLB Pipeline for the A's. Limits hard contact very well. 100th percentile in his sample last year in average exit velocity, barrel rate, and hard hit rate. He does walk a lot of guys, doesn't strike out a lot. He had a really successful fastball last year. His off-speed and breaking did get hit. Last season, the changeup, a WOBA of 327, expected WOBA of 223. Only 78.9 exit velocity on that pitch. So I think you expect his numbers to kind of regress to the mean and for him to be a better pitcher next year. So Noah Murdock here, he was the Rule 5 pick for the A's this season from the Kansas City Royals. Former 7th round pick in 2019. He's a fastball, slider, cutter guy. Really struggled with command throughout the minors. A 15.4% walk rate last year, but he's always had really good strikeout numbers. 27% last season. A 3.18 ERA and a 3.51 FIP in 62.2 innings last season in AAA. He'll be one to watch, definitely. I'll like to see what his numbers look like once he gets up to the majors in terms of how his pitches do. But in recent years, the A's have always gone after a guy in the Rule 5 draft, and this season it was Noah Murdock. Hogan Harris is going to be your long reliever, a guy who's going to come in and start some games. A 2.86 ERA last year, but a 4.23 FIP. You would expect those numbers to get closer. His off-speed pitches generated 3 run value last year. He does an above-average job at limiting barrels. Everything else, he's below average in. A 3rd round pick of the A's in 2018. He's been in their system for a while. I think it could definitely be a high-variance season for him. You see the 2.86 ERA, the expected ERA at 5.04 on Baseball Savant. We'll see what we have for Hogan Harris in 2025. So after the Major League roster, we're going to go straight into top prospects here. Everything's going to be on the 2080 scale. And Jacob Wilson is their number 1 overall prospect. I already went over him in the shortstop rankings, so I'll give you 2, 3, and 4. We got 2 guys here in the top 100 by Baseball America. Nick Kurtz at 34, Colby Thomas at 86, and then Jack Perkins is the number 4 prospect in their system. Nick Kurtz was a 4th overall pick in last year's draft, and he was incredible last season. TLDR for him, he's an advanced, well-rounded bat. He's got a good chance to be the first hitter from last year's draft to make the majors. He could be a top 10 first baseman at his peak. He was 130% better than league average last year in 12 games in the minors, 5 at AA, 7 at A. 24% walk rate, 20% K rate. He slugged .763. Actually an above average defender at first base as well. He's just 21 years old, a 60 hit tool, 60 power. He should be a guy on your radar for the 2025, if not 2026 season at first for the A's. Colby Thomas is a prospect that has a lot of variation in the way he's been scouted. Number 3 prospect in the A's by Baseball America, but by Fangraphs, a number 26 prospect. He was a 3rd round pick by the A's in 2022 out of Mercer. Made it up to AAA last year, kind of struggled with the strikeouts all season, 24.7% K rate, doesn't walk a ton, 7%, but he was really good, 31% better than league average across all 3 levels, 132 games last year. And the biggest thing for him, 31 home runs in the minors last season, 14 in 59 games at AA, 17 in 73 games at AAA. A solid defender, 60 field, 55 arm, a decent runner, 55 run, 60 power, not the greatest hit tool. We see that with the strikeouts, but you can't really argue with 31 homers in the minors last year. A 55 Baseball America grade, a 24-year-old outfielder, projectably a center fielder, 86 in the top 100 in Baseball America. Jack Perkins is Baseball America's number 4 prospect. Again, a lot of variation in the scouting. 21st by Fangraphs. 5th round pick in 2022 out of Indiana. Right-handed pitcher. Was really good last year. 18 games, 16 starts, a 2.88 ERA, 2.71 FIP, struck out 32.1% of batters he faced and only walked 10.9. Really solid numbers there. He took a pretty big step forward from 2023, where he only struck out 20% of the batters he faced in high A and double A with a 358 and 438 FIP in those two spots. Said to have a plus fastball and slider, also has a curveball and a changeup that are average to above average, and a cutter that's a 50 grade. 60 grade control for him. He should be a pretty solid player, not as high of a ceiling as some of these pitchers in the top 3 prospects, but a pretty high floor prospect that should get up to the majors, I would assume, this season. He is on the 40-man roster for the A's. Getting into some of these infield prospects, catcher Daniel Susac, 24 years old, got up to Double A last year. He's their number 17 prospect. First round pick in 2022, 88 games in Double A last season, 103 weighted runs created plus, an average to above average defender at the position. Kind of the red flag with him, 26% K rate, 4.3% walk rate last season as he moved up the system. Max Muncy, yes, Max Muncy, a first round pick in 2021 out of high school, 58 games in AAA and Complex League last year, 124 weighted runs created plus, pretty solid season there. 10 home runs in those 58 games. Did only walk 7.7% of the time, 27% K rate, but projected to be an above average fielder at shortstop. He's their number 9 prospect. Next, we got Tommy Tanks. Third baseman Tommy White here from LSU, North Carolina State. 60 power, 55 hit tool. Doesn't necessarily do anything else super well. 40th overall pick in last year's draft. The TLDR for him, his skill set is similar to Maikel Franco's. That projection, I think, is kind of fair for him. He does have a 60 grade raw power. In his 3 seasons in college, 27, 24, 24 home runs in 55, 66, and 66 games. He played 25 games at A-ball last year, 67 weighted runs created plus. Not a big sample, not a lot to make out of it. Josh Kuroda-Grauer here, he was a 3rd round pick out of Rutgers last season, and he actually got up to AAA. 123 weighted runs created plus in 28 games in the minors last year. Struggled a bit at AAA. They had him mostly in A and high A ball, but he's an advanced hitter. He had a 157 weighted runs created plus in his last season at Rutgers. Got on base at a 421 clip in the minors this year. An average fielder at second and an above average runner. I think he's a pretty solid prospect and definitely one to watch. He's their number 15 prospect. And finally, Darrell Hernaiz. He got up to the majors last year. Acquired in a trade with Baltimore in January of 23. He had a 50 weighted runs created plus last season in 48 games, so not great. 230 WOBA, 242 slug, and 1 home run. He was 16% better than average as a hitter in AAA last year, though, so there's something to look forward to. He doesn't strike out a ton, more of a contact bat than anything. Going into the outfield, we got 4 guys here. Denzel Clark, I really like him as a prospect. 70 runs, 70 field, so he can do a lot of things that give you value. 60 grade power, he's your number 7 prospect. Really an elite athlete. He had 120 weighted runs created plus last year at AA, 130 the year before. I would expect him to start in AAA this season and maybe make his way up to the majors. 13 home runs last year in 116 games, 12 in 64 the season before that. He's been an above average hitter every step of the way in the minors. Henry Bolt might have the most fitting name in all of baseball, as he's got 80 grade speed by Fangraphs, only 60 by Baseball America, but the numbers speak for themselves in the minors. 46 stolen bases last year in 123 games. He did strike out 34.7% of the time last year. 138 weighted runs created plus to go along with that, though, an 11.2% walk rate. He slugged 466, had 15 homers. He's definitely a boomer bust prospect, and we'll see what he does next season. I would see him in AAA at some point this year, probably not the majors in 25. Rodney Green is your number 20 prospect, another really good runner and fielder with good power similar to Denzel Clark. A draft pick last season, he just got to A-ball, 24 games, 120 weighted runs created plus, 3 home runs, 9 stolen bases. Walked over 11% of the time, but did strike out 26% of the time. And then finally, Carlos Pacheco here. He was unranked by Baseball America, but has some really good stats. 20th ranked by Fangraphs. Walked 12% of the time last year, 11 stolen bases in 48 games, 113 weighted runs created plus in the Complex League. I would like to see him stateside at some point this year. We'll see what he does. Still just 20 years old. Getting into the pitchers here, Luis Morales is your number 5 prospect, 22 years old, high A, above average fastball, slider, and changeup with 50 control. Last season at high A, a 4.22 ERA, 4.06 FIP, 84 strikeouts to 36 walks in 81.0 innings pitched. We'll go on to Mason Barnett. He was acquired from the Royals in the Lucas Erceg trade at the deadline last year. A 3.55 FIP last year. He struck out 28.5% of batters that he faced. He got up to double A, 4 really solid pitches and a 50 control. He's 24 years old. Really interesting one here. 24-year-old Chen Zong Ao Zhang. Look at the pitches that he has there. 24 prospect by Baseball America. He got up to double A last year. He has listed on his Baseball America page a fastball, a curveball, a slider, a changeup, and a splitter, and every single one of those pitches is above a 45 grade. An amateur free agent from Taiwan in November of 2021. In 23 games, 15 starts last year, 86 innings, 25.2% K rate, 3.6% walk rate, a 2.09 ERA, and a 2.96 FIP. He's a very solid pitcher. I think definitely one to watch and one that could develop into a higher end starter depending on the development of those pitches. Steven Echeverria here, number 12 prospect, a righty, 3 above average pitches and a 50 control. 3rd round pick out of high school in 2023. Not much for numbers. A 6.55 ERA, a 5.06 FIP last season and 52 innings at A-ball. He was just 18 years old. Let's see if those numbers end up making a sharp increase going into next year. And then finally, we have Will Johnston, a 13th round pick out of Texas A&M, but a guy who has really solid numbers. 3.09 FIP in 2024, a 2.28 at the double A level. 99.2 innings, 15 starts, 27 games. Struck out 33.2% of batters faced, only walked 9.7. At double A, he struck out 40% of the batters that he faced. Only ended up starting towards the end of the year last year. Both of his appearances at Double A were starts. I really like him moving forward. A really interesting pitcher here. The projected 2028 lineup by Baseball America is a really solid one. You got a lot of guys here that already have major league experience, and Shea Langeliers, Zach Geloff, Jacob Wilson, JJ Bleday, Lawrence Butler, and Tyler Soderstrom, and then a couple of these higher prospects that are really developing right now. I think the coolest thing about this list is you have all these guys that already have the major league experience and only 2 dudes at the age of 30. I think I do see the catcher first base situation working out with this. Kurtz is the better defender at first, and I think the A's want Langeliers to be their long-term catcher, so I could definitely see Soderstrom being the DH. I do think Brent Rooker will be here in 2028. I don't think the A's want to trade him. He's a guy that's really hard to trade because it's a tough gauge of value as he's just a DH, but how good of a hitter he is, you can't move off of him right now. If you're able to throw Kurtz maybe at a corner outfield position or figure something out with maybe a trade to bring in a pitcher, I think Rooker should have a spot on this projected lineup. But outside of that, you feel really good about the future lineup for the 2028 Las Vegas A's. The Baseball America projected rotation and closer are a little different. I do think we see more vets get injected into this group. I don't know if Sears necessarily ends up being here. I do like some of the guys that they got coming up. JT Ginn is a guy who I didn't mention as a prospect, just doesn't have great numbers at the minor league level. I do definitely foresee Perkins and Morales as guys who will get up and contribute to the A's, if not this year, maybe the upcoming years. Barnett could be a starter for sure. I think he also could be a pretty solid bullpen option for them. And then Mason Miller, if you have him here in 2028, I think you feel really good about where your organization is at. Sevy and Springs will both be free agents by this time, so we might see them move on, but I think the A's end up figuring a couple other things out in terms of this rotation, and I don't think this is exactly what their 2028 rotation looks like. With all of that being said, I want to thank you guys so much if you're listening to this part of the video. I enjoy making these videos a ton, but it does take a lot of time. So I really appreciate anybody listening to this. I'll be making the rest of them. They'll all be out by opening day, and I'm so excited to keep going. I feel really good about this A's team. If anybody is a betting person, I would hammer the over on the team this year. Not very high at 76.5. I feel really good about them going over that number. But that'll be it. I'll be signing off on the A's breakdown, and we'll get to number 27 in the next video. Thank you guys.